Welcome to another episode of the Northern Lights Podcast, hosted by the Minnesota Cannabis College. My name is Marcus Harkis. We've got Dr. Clement Dabney in the building, and we've got Jess Human, an extraordinary equity advocate. So, how are y'all feeling today? Happy spring.
Listen, I'm a new Minnesotan, and the fact that it is warm is a blessing. There's sun and warmth, and I'm great.
I mean, can you tell us who you are? Like, tell us about your personal journey.
Yeah. I'd like to say that I'm Jess Human. And I also want to extend gratitude for you hosting me and here to have this conversation. I think that what we're going to talk about is probably really important and relevant to our communities. I am a native Detroiter, a published author. My book is around self-help, and I'm also what I call a cannabis consumer activist. So I like to increase representation around cannabis consumption and create opportunities for folks to get engaged in both the industry and in the culture.
Nice.
Yeah, so I guess can you kind of explain your, I guess, educational background for folks? Because you're incredibly distinguished.
As are you.
Thank you.
Takes one to know one.
Yeah, we're highly educated, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went to the University of Michigan, where I got my bachelor's degree in sociology and Spanish with a sub-concentration in the economy, business, and society. And what that means is I looked at social structures and how that affects money. And it made me really interested in what our social structures were that were enhancing money. And that led me to education, and I did a lot of educational equity work and ended up getting a master's in education. And I worked in secondary and post-secondary education for 7 years before navigating into nonprofit development. But before I got into nonprofit development, I was like, education is cool, and I also really care about getting out of the debt from my education. So how can I learn more about this business side of things, and got an MBA. And while I was getting my MBA at the University of Delaware, my sorority sister is actually Whitney Beatty out of LA, who has Josephine and Billy's, which is the first dispensary that's centered around Black women. But she launched her first product line, which was the Apothecary. And she was a TV producer. And she was talking about cannabis as a tool to help her mitigate her anxiety. And I had been using it similarly, right? Like I had really crisis response jobs. I was really stressed out, and I would go on hikes and like microdose or like I would smoke a gram in about a week. Like that was how much I was smoking.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very lightweight, right? And so I was learning her story, and I was like, and she was talking about cannabis justice and talking about how folks were going to jail on this, folks that look like me. Folks from communities like mine, because I'm from Detroit. And there were still white men in California who were getting really, really rich off of it. And I was like, wow, all of my intersections of justice and social structures that are advancing equity or advancing inequity seem to be colliding in this microcosm of cannabis. And so my capstone project, what we had to study an industry that we wanted to move into, was on cannabis. And so that was in 2017. And in 2018, Michigan legalized adult use cannabis. And I was like, well, I just got married. I wanted to go home and be around my family. And so that's how I kind of moved into the cannabis space and opened a weed-themed Airbnb that was doing like education, community organizing, and like centered on women. So it was a really bougie, like girly space that was like, let's have tea parties and smoke weed. And that's like how I got into the business side of things.
So the timing of your capstone project studying the, equity within cannabis industry, it seemed like immaculate timing. Was it influenced at all by the fact that Michigan was going to come online?
I think that, so my wife also studied wildlife ecology and conservation. So she's always been really into green industries. And so she planted the seed, like weed is coming online in Michigan too. And then my sorority sister was blowing up. When I tell you blowing up, I was like, oh, this weed thing is blowing up. So I think I was definitely persuaded by like this zeitgeist that weed is the new green rush, which is it is not there. There's very little actual economic opportunity for folks who don't come from money. And so I was persuaded by that. Like, oh, this seems like a thing that I can get into and be passionate about, because there are folks who have gone to jail, and people who have gone to jail experience 48,000 barriers in their life and collateral consequences. to doing things, and that's always inspired me, is how am I creating change in the lives of others. And so when I was pursuing licensure in the Michigan market, I was looking to do a grow cooperative so that we could center folks that maybe don't have the same business, the institutional education, like I can do the MBA thing and the speak that way, but some folks can't navigate both worlds. And so how could I create a business opportunity to ensure that those folks were represented? So I was going after a grow cooperative, and then I was like, actually, I don't want to be in the industry in that way.
Since you're very passionate about criminal justice and incarceration and cannabis reform, and you're, a policy expert and innovator, like what role could cannabis play in providing employment opportunities for formerly incarcerated individuals in areas like packaging or distribution or cultivation?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work in cannabis justice, working with folks who are incarcerated, and I think the experiencing gap is that like a lot of entry level opportunities are well below the economic threshold that a lot of like folks who end up in jail are pushing weight. Like they are used to making a certain amount of money. And so when they come out and being a bud tender and making $15 an hour, that's not what they're looking for in the industry. So I am like thinking about what are other innovative technology? How are we helping to build tech capabilities? How are we advancing? There's so much tech in cannabis, and also, yes, being an operator is also a pathway to do well in the industry, but sometimes when you're the plug, you don't know how to do the regulatory compliance game, which is a big game, to make sure that you don't get lots of fines and your license revoked. But I do think that, yeah, there's roles throughout the industry. I have this like chart that I could share over that is like cannabis is an industry and there are lots of ancillary ways. I think that we need to be innovative and not only think about plant touching opportunities, but what are the ways to develop a new emerging market through like marketing opportunities, through events, through hospitality, through branding, through community engagement, through education, through technology, because that all ties into all those things. So I would say folks who have been incarcerated and when they're looking for employment, one, the industry has to make sure that there is a pathway for them to know where that employment lives. So how are you amplifying those opportunities and not just staying in your bubble to employ? But two, we have to look for innovative ways that can get them the economic threshold that they're really looking for. And another way I would say is like skilled labor. There are people building grows, right? There are people building the plumbing infrastructure. There are people that are specializing in this. And so if they can gain a specialty in that way, then they can make the type of money that they're used to making.
Now, how many people in the Michigan legacy market were able to cross over to the legal market? Are you aware?
There's not like good data to document like who was in the legacy market. I do know that the CRA, which is our cannabis regulatory agency in Michigan, did do a study to look at diversity around race in ownership, and that the Black folks were only owning about 2% of the industry there. I will also say that Michigan is an uncapped state. So if you're looking at policy and how one of the things that's really beautiful about Minnesota's policy is this idea of a craft market and trying to keep our industry smaller. And I know that there is critique of that. However, for context, the company that I worked for was licensed for 1.25 million plants. In Minnesota, because you can stack licenses in Michigan. So they had like all these Class C licenses stacked up. In Minnesota, the largest currently that you can have is that med adult U combo license, which is 60,000 square feet canopy. If you're averaging 2 square feet per plant, so it's like 30,000 plants is the max that one business can grow in Minnesota compared to 1.25 million plants. So the competition and the market saturation in Michigan is terrible. We just had a political article written about the industry that they've reached a $10.2 billion industry or something like that in the last few years since it's been AU. But that's because there's like 10 billion businesses, like literally, and they're not making very much money. The market has dropped tremendously, and so there's not very many legacy operators that are operating at scale. And that are operating successfully in the Michigan market.
So I guess with your experience in the Michigan marketplace, could you talk about, and as like a policy innovator, you mentioned that 2% of these businesses are black owned. What high level ideas would you have or propose to increase that 2% to more than 2%? And could you parallel it to what you might see here in Minnesota? And how could we just ensure that, that there's representation among racial demographic groups?
Yeah, so one of my favorite examples of cooperation and cooperative economics is in Detroit. There's something called the Black Excellence Coalition, and it's kind of founded by a bunch of black organizations that technically are in competition with one another, right? Like, you're a dispensary on the east side, you're a dispensary on the west side, we are in competition, or you have this grow brand, you have this grow brand, you have this product brand, but they've organized to take up market space, right? Like, so they do billboards together, they do events together, and they've created this like black owned label, this Black Excellence label, to make sure that their products in their stores are amplified with one another. And when they have like 420 events, they'll do like the Weed Bar will do like a 420 tour where it goes to these different dispensaries on their like party bus so that these brands are amplified. So cooperative economics is not innovative. It is ancestral. We've always been doing this. Indigenous people have
Yes.
always been doing this. And so I think the more that we can organize and not really buy into the scarcity mindset, and I know people are going to be mad, but in Minnesota, one of the unique opportunities that I think is often positioned as a barrier is tribal compacting. Tribal folks are colonized people like us, and they're going to have product available sooner than other folks. So how are you making sure that your retail has some of that product on your shelves, and you're organizing to make sure that we can position ourselves to be successful here in Minnesota? But that would be like, how are you collaborating with one another instead of feeling like we can all eat at the table, especially when we come together? And then consumers, making sure that you're conscious about who you're shopping with. You need to be shopping with, if you're a black consumer, keep the dollar in the black dollar pockets, right? And so if there was some sort of like organization or some sort of label that let folks know who those brands are so that folks can be loyal to those brands. And like, you always go into maybe a black owned restaurant and you're like, man, the customer service just wasn't. I hear a lot of critiques around, okay, how do you pull this aside and have a conversation about how to better maintain the product and stay invested into the brand so that you're still not losing that black dollar? Because I think that there's data around like the black dollar leaves the black community in like some odd seconds, whereas when it's compared to like white folks, it stays in there for months. Like, I'm not knowing the real statistic, but it's just alarming how soon our money leaves our community.
Yeah, there's a lot more black people in Michigan than Minnesota too. So if it's only 2% in Michigan, those are frightening prospects here.
It's really, and that's the other reason why when I know I'm not a grower, right? I don't know how to grow weed. And really, if I'm being truly honest, I'm not a stoner. I consume weed in all different types of ways. My face serum has cannabis in it. I use topicals, and I used to smoke, but I know business, right? Like, I have an MBA, and I know how to talk the game. So when I think about cooperative economics, I'm like, how do I build relationships and build a business model where I'm sharing equity with folks who have different skill sets than me? I might need to be with my cooperative had someone who knew marketing, someone who was a grower, somebody who knew finance, because I don't know how to do a pro forma, somebody who knew, somebody who knew development, because I don't know how to talk to people without, I'm very authentic, and that is my problem. I don't know how to code switch in a way that's like, how do I talk to this white man to be appealing? I'm still gonna be like, this is for black people, so give me your money or not. But so I had all these people on my team, and yes, I shared equity, but I know how to write the business plan, the business model, and come up with a strategy. And so sometimes we just got to get out of these colonizer mindsets. Like, this idea of scarcity and breaking us apart and not cooperating is coming from the systems that were designed to oppress us and keep us apart.
So you mentioned that you're not a stoner, but you are a cannabis consumer. Can you talk a little bit have you ever tried THCA flower? What are your thoughts about THC flower, and have you been tracking the potential farm bill?
Yeah, I have been tracking the farm bill, and I have THC flower. Once you burn it, you combust it. It's going to get you just as high as regular flower. And I don't I'm not a smoker heavy. So I haven't been smoking THCA flower, but What do you want me to tell you about what I know about it?
I guess I'm just curious about your thoughts on the potential changes of the Farm Bill and how that influence THCA flower. Because I think that, Minnesota and let's just say Wisconsin have very different views on THCA flower. Here, you can't find it anywhere. I mean, you can definitely find it. Some of the tribes are selling it, and there's a lot of stores that after hours, like right by our manufacturing site, after 5 o'clock, they start selling the flower because they know that the regulators aren't coming to look at that time. But digressing, sorry. But so like Wisconsin's like the Wild West. You can just cross the border into Hudson and buy a bunch of weed essentially, or THCA flower. So I guess kind of like, what do you see as like the market dynamics there, or how a new farm bill could change that? Or
the farm bill is supposed to be testing post, like once it's combusted with what's the word?
Decarboxylated.
Yeah, decarboxylated. So technically, and Minnesota is a full THC testing state. So like THCA is included in the potency limit. So it's supposed to be below 0.3%. So if they're selling stuff that's over 0.3%, that is not compliant and not within regulation. Now, we do know that this industry has always been non-compliant and not within regulation. So those are things that are combating. I will say that what I've heard in July, I went to a Black Cannabis Operators Conference in Chicago, and one of my homegirls was talking about, like, I should have went and just created a hemp company because the barriers to entry within the THC is so costly. And now I'm competing with hemp on the market, which I think will be a very real. I am interested to see how the market unfolds in Minnesota because low potency hemp products it is the baby in the cannabis industry. When you're around and they talk about Minnesota, they're going to be talking about the drinks. Because that's unique. We can go to a bar and get stoned. Like that's not what's happening anywhere else in the country. And so I think that it will create some unique market tensions when adult use cannabis comes online. One, because you're going to have different markets of consumers. You're going to have the typical stoner who doesn't care where the weed is coming from, as long as it's good weed. Like in Michigan, the market is really saturated, meaning that you can get like a pound sometimes for $300. And that's about the rate of a pound of hemp, right? Of hemp flower. And typically a pound of cannabis flower is looking like $2,000 to $4,000, depending on where the market is. And so if you have this segmented market of consumers who are like, I am not comfortable going into a dispensary or like a adult use where I have to show my ID. Like I'm not a stoner like that. Like I don't want them knowing or tracking my usage of this. But that's a bigger audience than the of adult in other markets of folks who are eligible to consume, right? The 21 and up adults who are eligible to consume. It's still only 20 to 26% of people that are consuming cannabis. And many of them are not consuming it in a public way because it is stigmatized. And so if we are only able to market to 20% of consumers, because that's who's shopping dispos, but here, more than 20, let's say like 50% of people are consuming some level of low potency hemp product. Like there's that segmentation that's happening. And so if this new adult use market is now going to have to compete with this hemp market, I think that it's going to be an interesting case study and an interesting tension that will exist in Minnesota that's going to be unique than other places.
Can you describe what it's like, being on a high stage, like giving a TED Talk or being on NPR, and what's your approach to storytelling?
I'm authentic. Like I literally am just myself, and it kind of gets me in trouble sometimes because I'm just like, I'm very trusting. Like, first of all, I guess the root to anybody, if I'm giving advice, is like, at the end of the day, this world was not designed for any of us. Particularly, I am a Black, tall, I'm 6 foot, big woman who is queer, right? So none of these systems were designed for me. So this world is imaginary to me because my reality is not supposed to exist here. On top of that, there are structures at play that want to continue to keep me out, right? Like you don't want me here. You don't want me to be as smart as I am. You don't want me to be as experienced as I am. You don't want me to make as much money as I have. Like you don't want this representation. We have powers that be that are doing that actively right now. And that's always happening. It's always happening throughout history. And so if you are going to talk and be yourself, you have to be really fucking cool with yourself. Meaning I don't care what anybody else has to say, but I know who I am, and I always walk in alignment and integrity with who I am. I will say that on the TED Talk stage, I'm obsessed with love, and I am obsessed with romantic love, with community love, with love of self. Like, I'm just obsessed with love. I grapple with that concept nonstop. And my TED Talk was on love. And in the middle of my TED Talk, you're supposed to just be talking, which is what I'm doing now. But I had it scripted. There were certain data points I wanted to make and not miss. There was certain all of this stuff. And it was a performance. And I forgot my lines. And I was on the stage in my little circle, and I was this is my moment. People are gonna see me. This is my TED Talk. I have a TED Talk, and I fucked up in my TED Talk. and I froze on stage, and I was this is, and so then I was you know what, I just got to show myself a little grace and love myself, and I'm gonna keep going. And I kept going, and I still fucked up again in the TED Talk, but it's fine. And then afterwards I went and I cried, and I did not celebrate. That was a moment in my life that I could have celebrated myself, because I did a TED Talk, right? That's still something that's on my resume. I still have a TED Talk online, even though in it I stalled and messed up my lines. But I went home and cried and felt so ashamed of myself and did not celebrate myself, because I was not, at the end of the day, really cool with me. And so from that point, that was my last year of my MBA program that I did my TED Talk, to today, I have gone through so many more failures. And so if I was to when you are taking up space, and when you are speaking, and when you are storytelling, really just speak from your own story, what you really know. You don't have to perform what you want people or what you think they expect to hear from you. Just show up as you. And the people who are supposed to hear you, the people who are supposed to land, they're going to come. And if they don't, those are not your people. And so I had a hard time accepting the fact that not everybody was my people.
Yeah, one thing that I've learned in just observing all this social media era and everybody trying to be an influencer is that the things that resonate the most are authenticity and vulnerability. And you talk about the value of failures. I mean, can you say more about that?
Listen, okay, so I wrote this self-help book, and I wouldn't be a good author if I didn't plug it. So it's called Sis Your Copper. I'm obsessed with copper. And because copper is a malleable metal, right, that rusts and tarnishes and turns green, and that you can polish and remake. And no, to the folks from St. Paul that know that copper is being stolen out of the light fixtures, no, I'm not stealing the copper here. But the premise is that life was not designed for this world, this reality, me being a highly educated woman, me being even speaking amongst men about industry is not that was not the norm, right? And so I wrote this book at the peak of my stuff, right? My first job outside my MBA was in nonprofit development. I was a managing director, and I also I told you I had my weed themed Airbnb, and I started hosting events out of my house, right? And I started educating my community around this potential industry that was coming. And I got fired from my job. So my first big girl job that was paying me a salary that was very nice, I got fired over weed. And this is I told you I was only smoking a gram a week. I wasn't even a real stoner, and I got fired for weed. And I was dang, I've also done all of the good girl check boxes. I got married. I got all the degrees. And now my first job outside my MBA, I have to tell people I got fired. And so that was my moment where I was well, I guess I got to do this weed thing. And I'm just going to have to do it and do it big. And so I went hard. My Airbnb has been featured in Essence. I got a grant to build my basement into an apartment. I got featured in a documentary that it has been Academy Award qualified. I was at my heaviest, I was 350. I lost 150 pounds. I had these I got a job in the industry paying me double what I was making at the job that fired me. I was at my prime, y'all. I was the cover, you could see this. I've gained 46 pounds since moving to Minnesota. I look a little different now.
Winter weight.
Winter or food. That's all I've been doing is eating. I wrote this book about managing stress in a world that's not designed for you. But I was at my best when I wrote it. Little did I know that the best place to find the value proposition for my book and to be vulnerable is to have everything taken away from you. So I was doing corporate social responsibility within the cannabis industry in an era where DEI is being canceled. So my budget got cut. I lost my big girl job that was paying me double, right? I got fired again. I found another job, moved to Minnesota, and had a weight gain, right? Like I've lost this like body image that I had at that point. I found out we were family planning. I found out I might have cervical cancer. My father died. And I was grieving the loss of my father. I got denied unemployment while I was terminated. All these things happened. And I had this like paralyzing mental breakdown. Quite honestly, I ended up in the psych ward. And this book is around managing a world with a diagnosis, because I've always had a depression diagnosis. And I hadn't spent substantial time with people who had debilitating mental illnesses, right? Until I spent time in the psych ward. So I will say that like part of my vulnerability in storytelling, and failure has to do with failing a whole fucking lot and getting back up and being like, you know what? I did lose 150 pounds and gain 46 pounds back. And guess who's still going to CrossFit into the gym right now? You know, I did lose a job over cannabis twice. And guess who's still working another job now? I did, close down my business because I had to move to Minnesota. But guess who's still talking and promoting herself? Like you just have to keep going. And like and not be ashamed of the hardships and the stuff that you've gone through that made you fail.
So I got a 2-part question for you. So where can people, this seems like an incredible book. So where can people, where can they find Sis Your Copper?
You can find my publisher, but it's on my social media platform. So if you follow me on Instagram at I am Jess Human, or just go to my website at jesshuman.com. There's a button that says buy my book. I will say that, yep, I'm Jess Human, and that's who I am today.
And then, so here's my second part of my question. You kind of discussed, folks out there cutting DEI programs. So we got Target cutting their DEI programs. We got, Cheeto, Trump cutting DEI around the country. So, what does social equity in cannabis mean to you on a personal level? And, I'll start there.
So I always am like, what? Because the problem with social equity in cannabis is that it's so jargony now. Even DEI, people saying DEI is jargony. Like people are not saying diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that people don't understand, if we're talking about social equity, what is really the root of inequity? So like, let's have a conversation there. And what does it mean to be advancing inequity? And for me, the root of inequity within cannabis is prohibition and criminalization. So like a lot of times when people want to talk to me about social equity in cannabis, I'm like, how many people have you talked to that went to jail for cannabis? How many people have you talked to that lost their job? How many people have you talked to whose daddy was in jail? If you can't talk to me about the justice impacted the community, then you can't talk to me about equity, because equity, the root of inequity is the criminalization. And then we can go even further and be like, the root of criminalization is racial profiling and mass incarceration and the new Jim Crow, if you haven't read Michelle Alexander. And I can say, don't talk to me about inequity if you're not willing to talk to me about race and racism and xenophobia. Because the root of regulation within the cannabis industry in America is rooted in xenophobia. Harry Anslinger, 1937 Marijuana Taxation Act. You know why he did that? Because it was, it was post-prohibition of alcohol, so he needed job security.
Right.
But also, he wanted to profile jazz musicians, black folks, and Mexican immigrants.
Right.
And what was the way to get them? Marijuana. And so if we want to talk about inequity in the cannabis industry, we have to talk about the racialized outcomes of inequity. And so then if we want to talk about equity, for me, it is not just licensure. Because if we're being honest, yes, I want to make sure that people are represented in the industry and that they get licensure. But all of my friends who have gone after licensure are struggling. I've had friends who've lost their mortgages on their house, because if you are affiliated with this industry, you are not protected under the FDIC, and banks don't want to work with you anymore. So they've had their mortgages just pulled away, and they had to figure out how to pay for their house. I've had friends not be able to fund their children's education. I've had friends who have lost grants on their healthcare because they're affiliated with this industry. So the risks are high. And it's really hard to be successful here. 280E means that you are taxed at your earning rate. there's no tax cuts. There's no like write-offs, all the write-offs that help businesses sustain themselves. You can't even write off your labor in this industry. And so, yes, there are, nuances that you could structure your business, but my people don't have lawyers and tax lawyers that know that type of stuff to get them to that place. And so a lot of folks are struggling and not super rich, like the promise that people make with this industry. So yes, I do want folks to have access to licensure, but I want them to understand the risk and reward before they take that step forward, and understand the market and understand that like you do have a market of people that will pay whatever for good weed. You got people that really know weed and want good stuff. And that's not the most of the market. And then you have folks that are going to pay for really pretty packages. And that means that, and then you have to understand what this culture of consumption is, and what people are looking for so that you can target and segment your market. And that all of this takes time to get this knowledge. And so I don't want folks to rush into the industry and licensure. So social equity to me is decriminalization, meaning if I have a joint on me and I get pulled over, I'm not going to go to jail for it. It also means access to consumption spaces, because like it's one thing to have an industry, but where am I smoking weed? I can't smoke it anywhere. You can't smoke weed in your apartment here.
Right.
Like, and it's cold here. I'm not, and I guess that I'm biased because I had an Airbnb that's weed themed. And so like I opened my home for community to smoke in my home. And so I'm like, in the winter here, I'm like, even if I wanted to smoke, I couldn't because I live in an apartment here. And so where can we consume and not be viewed as a criminal for consuming, And then if I do have a felony, if I do have a criminal record, which again comes with 48,000 collateral consequences. You can't adopt kids. You can't take your kids on a field trip. You can't buy a house. You can't get a job. You can't go to school. Like all those things. Expungement. We got to get rid of those records. I also think that having accessible legislators and regulatory agencies that want to have real conversations with people to understand their thoughts, that is a part of equity to me, because if you don't have community informed practices, then you are not doing right by community. And so that is a part of social equity to me. And yeah, I would say and a deep understanding of where inequity comes from. I think that people throw around social equity because it's flashy and it's nice, and they know that people want to support that, especially in a progressive state like Minnesota, but they don't really know what it means. And if I start talking about like racial profiling and how Black men are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated for cannabis in Minnesota than white men, they get comfortable and silent. So are you really advancing equity if you can't talk about racism?
I mean, you can't really effectively treat any symptoms unless you understand the cause of the symptoms. So yeah, that's spot on. I mean, do you have hope for the Minnesota market? Like, will there be success stories among people who are not already independently wealthy who are trying to get in the market?
There are lots of people who are already organizing and continuing the conversation and helping other folks to enter the conversation. So where there are people that are organizing, there will always be success. And so I have deep hope that there will be successful stories that represent the Minnesota market and represent the Minnesota community effectively and advance social equity.
So you kind of talked about, like the lack of places to smoke in Minnesota. Like as Jess Human, if you were designing the perfect framework for cannabis events, what would that look like to you?
Yeah.
Girly. I told you I did it in Detroit. We had tea parties, spa parties, like I want to go to my nail shop and get my nail and have a little champagne flute with a THC beverage in it. I want to go to the spa and get a massage using THC oil. And then, all the girly, bougie, cutesy, demure little of things. I have one of the things that Zenco Life at my house, and this is how I take dabs. It does the thing, fills with smoke, and I'm like drinking it out of a little wine glass.
Zenco Labs?
It's Zenco Life is the device, okay. And it's like a Puffco, but not at all. Actually, it's not like Puffco. It like I'll show you later. But like those types of things. Those types of things are also like tech. So bougie and I am also from Detroit. You know, we rock buffs and furs, so we like things a little lavish and like luxurious. So like luxurious. I love the chandelier in here. You know, like this is one thing I noticed when I came in. Like, okay, this cutesy.
It wasn't the giant mural on the wall?
Nope, it was the chandelier. That's where my eye went. If you had anything copper, it would have been that.
What are your long-term visions and future aspirations? Like, where do you see yourself in 2 years, and how about 5?
I want to be a mom. Like that's like, so even like I'm not smoking right now. I'm not consuming cannabis at all, because actually from the perspective of consumer advocacy means that you have to also recognize your bias. So I be in an echo chamber with all my consumer friends, but there's also research that shows that if you're older and you're looking to have a kid, cannabis really does affect your hormonal balances. And so like I am making sure that I'm not consuming cannabis while I'm figuring out this pregnancy journey. So my one aspiration right now is to be a mom. And if you didn't know, being queer and trying to have a baby is expensive as hell. Do you know how much y'all can make some money off of what your body naturally produces? That costs $2,000 a shot.
God damn.
Yes, right. And I'm going to say this because I'm sitting with two men of color. There are not black sperm donors, so like I need y'all to be donating. But yeah, so like that's where my mind is. And my job, thankfully, offers IVF benefits, which is great. In terms of, I also, before I left Detroit, I took a real estate development class. So Copper House, which is my Airbnb, was my first real estate development project. And when I tell you that I'm very meticulous when it comes to details, I have this big ass spreadsheet with all of the different stages of the project. I don't do any manual labor. So as people are telling me what they did here in this building, I'm like, I wish I would want to touch a hammer, because I don't. I do believe in equality. My wife is the butch lesbian that will do that. Women can do that. I'm not saying they can't. This woman won't. And I had the spreadsheet with all the phases of the project. I scoped out contractors, at least three, and picked out the most affordable. All my contractors were queer people of color. So like I made sure that all my money went back into that community. And then I took a real estate development class. And it's like because part of gentrification is that the development in our communities is not happening by us. And so when I think about what I want to do in terms of long-term goals, I would love to buy, Minnesota has a housing shortage. I would love to buy an old warehouse, turn it into some nice lofts, make sure that the folks who own this warehouse and lofts are folks that reflect the community, and be a part of that development. Like that's where my head is right now.
Equitable development. I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, what have been the things that have surprised you the most about Minnesota? Like that you love and that you hate?
Okay, I said this yesterday. I met Mayor Carter. He's the mayor of St. Paul. And I said, where are the black people? I did. And it's interesting because somebody told me that one of my references when they called about, because the type of job that I got, it's hard to get into if you don't have a connect. I don't have a connect, and I like whatever. And they called my references, and they were like, Jessica wants to move to Minnesota. Why didn't I look at the racial demographics here? This state is like almost 80, I think it's 82% white. I'm from Detroit, which is 79% black. And it is so white. And it's cool. I'm getting used to it, but it is so white here. So that is my surprise. But the things that I love about Minnesota, it is very ethnically diverse. It is way more ethnically diverse than Detroit is. There are lots of like East African immigrants. There's Liberian immigrants. There are Somali immigrants. There are Hmong immigrants. So that 46 pounds came from all the food that I'm eating from all these. So I love the food culture, the food scene. I also really, really love thrifting and sustainable fashion, and the fashion scene here. Like it's not Detroit fashion, because Detroit fashion is label. Like you got to be stunting on the scene. In fact, I'm in my crunchy girl era here, and I guess I'm fine with that. But like my look here is not a look in Detroit. You know, it's like I could go out with my thrifted jeans and people are like, oh, you're so cute here. If I go to Detroit, they're like, what you wearing? Why are you wearing it? So I love the sustainable fashion scene here. And I love the green space in the city. It is so, and I said that all my friends was hating on me when I first moved here because I was like, Minnesota's so clean. It just made me realize Detroit is, I love you, Detroit, but y'all do not recycle. You throw stuff in the street. I can literally walk blocks in the city and not see any trash. And that is not an experience I get at home. So I love Minnesota is clean. I love the food. And then I really do love the fashion scene. I wish that y'all were not so Minnesota nice, antisocial, because it's really hard to enter and find a social scene. And then it's really, really cold here. And then it is very, very racially homogenous, if we're being honest.
You should move over north. Willard Hay neighborhood, that's where I grew up. You see a lot of black people.
That's where I need to be. I moved downtown. Literally moved across the street from I don't know anybody here. So I moved to the apartment building across the street from my office.
The north side will welcome you.
So if you could give, one piece of advice to your younger self to inspire our younger audience, how do they, how did you navigate doing, all these incredible things, all these things that, took a lot of effort and probably, were hard to do? What would you give to some advice to younger folks or your younger self?
I think that I'm going to be very cliche and say this, but you can't eat an elephant but one bite at a time. I think that especially with technology and social media, you see people getting to where you want to be day zero. And that's not the reality. There's this guy in Detroit and he bought I want to buy a block in Detroit so bad. That's what I want to do. And he bought a block and he built a castle in the middle of the hood. It is he took houses and built a walkway and he has this 6-car garage. It is immaculate. And I'm like, wow, I want that. I can do that. This man been doing construction for 34 years. He bought that house, started with one house, built the next house. It took time. It took almost 40 years. Yeah. And so for me to think that I'm going to get there day 2, I just did my first real estate development project 2 years ago. So it's going to take time, and it's okay to take time. You don't have to rush everything. And even if it doesn't happen as fast as your plan says, anything that God puts in your mind, because I do believe in God, is meant to happen for you. You just have to really have faith and learn the lessons that you're supposed to learn.
That's beautiful. Do you have any parting words for those of us in the cannabis community, the advocates, the entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think your voice matters, and the doors are always open to the folks who need to hear your voice. So make sure that you're leveraging the privilege that you have as the representatives of this industry, and organize. Continue to organize. Don't buy into models of scarcity. And you're supported. You believe that you're supported and you want to be supported.
And we kind of talked about it, where people can find Sis Your Copper, but just to tell people again, where can people follow your journey or get involved in conversations you're leading?
Yeah, JessHuman.com is the best place to go to find me.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, inspiring, and we thank you for coming.
Yeah, you're very human and you're brilliant. Wow, I'm so inspired. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for continuing to organize and host conversations with community.
Yeah, I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thanks for tuning in. We're nothing without our audience, our community. So thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Tanner. Thank you, Steve. Peace and blessings.
Northern Lights is a Minnesota Cannabis College production. This episode was produced by me, Tanner Barris, and by Steve Eigenman and Jordan Witt. Production assistance from Marcus Harkis, Shayna Payton, and John Barty. Video and audio recording at the Dabbler Depot studio by Jordan Witt. The information provided in this podcast does not, and is not intended to, constitute legal advice, but is instead for general information purposes only. No listener should act solely on the basis of information provided without first seeking advice from their own legal counsel. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Minnesota Cannabis College. Please listen responsibly.